Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the committee meeting for the Alternative Educator Preparation Application Review Committee. It is 2:03. Melissa, can we have roll call, please?
Yes. Chairwoman Peasley?
Here.
Vice Chair Aragon?
Present.
Member Garcia?
Here.
Member Reedy?
Here.
Member Robledo?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the call to the public. And I know we are going to be hearing a presentation from Alliant, but is there anybody else? Do we have a...
Madam Chair, members, staff hasn't received any other call to the public.
All right, thank you. Then we'll go on to item number 2, and that is the presentation, discussion, and possible action to issue a recommendation to the State Board of Education regarding the Alternative Preparation Program application of Alliant International University. And Catcher, if you will lead us through that conversation.
Sure. Madam Chair, members, just before we get into the specifics of the program and have the applicant come up and talk about it themselves, I do just want to, again, talk about the process just so we're all on the same page. There is information on Simbly for the application that we did send to everyone, and I didn't pull it up in advance. But it is up there. We also uploaded the more recent documents that they provided, and so all of that, and you should all have your Surface Books in front of you, and hopefully you have access and you can view those materials. So I did want to make sure that you were aware of that. As you can also probably tell by that sound, I think we have folks from Alliant who are also joining us by phone, and so they may be introduced by some of the folks here in person to chime in as necessary. So I just want to pull up the item here. And so there were some additional items that were added. Those attachments were emailed to you, but I also, this way, they're all in one spot for you, so that way you don't have to switch between your email and Simbly. They're all on the Simbly that was added. For what the committee can do, again, there's 2 options for the application. It's recommending approval to the state board or recommending denial. If the committee recommends denial and the board goes through with that recommendation, then the applicant has 60 days to resubmit, and then it'll come back before this committee. I think we're familiar with that because we had that happen previously earlier this year or last year, but did just want to make sure that we were aware of that. And if the committee did recommend a denial, it would also be prudent to identify some of the deficiencies. And so that way the board can identify those deficiencies or more, so that way the applicant is aware of, maybe what they need to work on. It's a little more straightforward if it's an approval, but with the approval, the committee and the board also can, identify some areas that they want to see addressed in the biennial report if necessary. So those are a couple options. Obviously, the big 2 recommending approval and denial, but some caveats around there as well if you'd like. And then finally, to this application itself, you'll notice that there are 3 programs within the one application. There's single subject, multiple subject, and the SPED. We had some discussions internally and outside about having those 3 program areas in one application. If you recall, we had another applicant come before the board. They split out their application and they did a secondary in one application and an elementary in another. We don't think that there's anything necessarily or inherently wrong with including 3 program areas in one application. However, there's a possibility that maybe certain members are evaluating the programs differently and coming up with different evaluation scores for the SPED and a different evaluation scores for the multiple subject and single subject. If that's the case, the committee can have different evaluation scores, and each individual member can have different evaluation scores. They can have the same. And if needed, the committee could recommend just 1 program or 2 programs or 3 or none for approval. And it's really how the committee feels. So I think just like we have in the past, what we'll do is we'll have, if the committee feels it prudent, we'll have the applicant come up and give a presentation answer questions that the committee members may have. And then if you haven't already, or if you want to make addendums to the scores that you've submitted to staff, you could do that after that time, and then we'll take a brief recess so staff can have time to compile the scores, and then those can be reported to you so you have some information as to what you want to do with the recommendation. So I just wanted to, I think we're all pretty familiar. I think, we've done this a couple times, so I think, the process should be getting familiar now, but I did want to just go over it one more time. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I'm thinking in terms of how to proceed, that Alliant staff could come and do an overall presentation about the program, but then I think we would like the university to break it down and do just one program, discuss one program at a time rather than rolling them all three together, because they are three very distinct programs, and the criteria to be met are different. Is that satisfactory? Okay. Thank you. Okay. Who do we have speaking for Alliant?
So I'm going to make introductory and overview of our program and how we deliver our education. And then the team is going to address each of the programs separately. And I think at this point we will start with the special education, if that's okay with you, Dr. Cochran. After I'm done, we'll start with the special education. And I'm going to keep my remarks brief on the presentation.
Could you tell us your name and your position, please?
So I am Dr. Mary Oling Sisay, and I am the Dean for the School of Education.
Okay. Thank you.
Are you looking for your PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So we have about 800 students in our teacher education program, and this is across elementary, secondary, which we also call multiple subject and single subject, and special education. The total programs offered in the School of Education are 8 programs outside of the teacher education programs. Our average class size is 27. Our courses are 8 weeks in length, and our completion rates at this point are 90.1%. Our primary focus is to address the competencies that our candidates need to have and to prepare them to be effective in terms of addressing the learners in the classrooms that they encounter. So this really informs how our curriculum is sequenced and scaffolded. We also collect a lot of data. I'll get to share a little bit with you here. And our purpose is we look at state standards. In this instance, we'll be looking at Arizona standards. And one of our key things that we do, which we have a formula, if you will, that really works between the curriculum and the clinical practice, which is where our candidates are evaluated in the schools that they're teaching in, is to make sure that we continue to motivate people to enter the teaching profession and to motivate them and mentor them to stay there. In a little bit, I'll tell you how exactly we do this. Our program is flexible, and when I say flexible, it doesn't mean it's easy. It's just in an accessible online format with a lot of mentorship support, what we call wraparound support, geared towards making sure the candidates get everything that they need to have. And then we lower attrition rates by providing support services while candidates are enrolled in the program. And then post-completion of the program, we offer additional support, and I will speak a little bit about it here. Our approach is an on-ramp, and the courses are sequenced in such a way that literally candidates are going on a ramp, and along the way it's scaffolded adjusted based on the requirements, and we are assessing both their competencies and how they are able to reach the students in their classroom. And we have a variety of assessment ways to do that. Our program details, it's 12 to 18 months of classroom alongside clinical practice. Our candidates can also get a master's degree with additional months, and we find that a lot of candidates really like this option. We tend to really target those teachers who are either on emergency certificates or don't have the appropriate certifications in underserved areas. Our students and candidates really are big on going into the underserved areas, and we believe that we've been very successful in our mechanism of training candidates to go into underserved areas. We do offer the In-Service Academy, which is after the candidates complete the program for the first 2 years after they graduate, and we offer a variety of professional development topics. If the committee is interested, I can go through the topics. Again, our program is online plus clinical practice, which is a face-to-face. These are some of the wraparound support services that we have dedicated to our candidates. So it's a combination of our faculty, and I should mention that many of our faculty members have also been teachers themselves, have been certified teachers, so they bring to the classroom a lot of experience. We have a variety of mechanisms to support our students, both face-to-face as well as virtual support mechanisms. We're really big on mentorship. Alliance International University, one of our pillars is professional practice, and so mentorship is an integral part of what we do in the School of Education. We identify university mentors who are answerable and accountable to the university to work with each of our candidates as they are beginning to shape their craft and so forth. In the next few slides, I'm going to show you kind of some data collection. We use TaskStream to collect data about our candidates, about the learners in the classrooms, to help us inform the curriculum and to help us on a continuous improvement path as we go along. So, for example, this is one data set which is quite recent, and we were trying to look at how much mentorship support we have provided our candidates. So we would say that an average of 30 is what we were shooting for, but as you can see here, along the various categories of providing either general mentorship support or targeted, in this instance we were looking at English learners, we exceeded the support hours that are provided to the students. The reason you see a differentiation in the graphs is because this is summary documentation, but for each candidate it would look different, and the mentor would then sit down with the candidate, with the school district liaison, and they would go through each candidate's form and develop an action plan for continuous improvement. The other piece of what we do is we have a sense of teacher performance expectations, and they're in the area of making subject matter comprehensible, assessing student learning, engaging and supporting students in learning, planning for instruction, creating effective learning environments, and developing as a professional. So these are the areas that we're continually evaluating our candidates on, and as we looked at it, they align very well with the different standards for Arizona, and we do collect a lot of data. As you can see here, the minimum score is 3 points, and in this instance, you can see the variation and where we have either come close to the 4 points or whether we are working on continuous improvement. So I just wanted to make sure that you kind of got this side of us that actually collects the data to fine-tune our craft. So here are the areas in detail that we are collecting the data on, and the scores as well. And this is along both the multiple, single subject, and special education. Our support system really is around the curriculum and methodology courses as candidates are in the classroom because we are an alternative prep. but also really making sure that we have this wraparound services around our university mentors, around our school site supervisors, and around our academic advisors. We do have a student evaluation and review committee, which is the group that looks at anybody who is struggling, whether that is in their coursework or whether that is in clinical practice in the classroom. And this group makes a review and works with the candidate and the mentors in developing a remediation plan for the candidate. This is the infrastructure that we support us as we come to Arizona. And so I am going to stop here, and I am going to go into the questions that you may have about special education and have Dr. Steve Cochran, who is our program director for special education, come up.
Thank you. And now I noticed one of the questions that I have is that what percentage of program completers remain in education for between 2 and 5 years? Do you have that information?
So 88% of our candidates have remained between 3 and 5 years in the profession. The other 12% are either administrators, they're in some form of education-related activity, but 88% of our candidates remain in the schools.
Is that consistent for all 3 programs?
That is consistent for all 3 programs, with the exception of special education, and I'm going to let you speak a little bit about that.
So I actually don't know the answer of what percentage remains for special education. We don't have any stats on that?
I think the special education was at 70.
70?
Okay. Any other committee members have questions?
Can you state your name for the record?
My name is Stephen Cochran, and I am a special education professor and the system-wide director for special education. I'd like to thank you guys for hearing our application. We feel like you guys are part of our community because we have so many Arizonians come to San Diego in the summer. So,
I also noticed that the continuing support post-program completion, that information was not included in the application, and that's pretty significant support that is provided. So how long does that support continue after an individual has completed your program?
2 years.
2 years.
What does that look like?
I'm sorry, I didn't get it.
What does that look like? So post-program support, is that just like?
So we have a variety of virtual support systems, but we also then use our university mentors who are face-to-face, who are the people who would have worked with the candidates previously. And then we put on professional development academies post-completion. So it's both virtual as well as face-to-face. We also have an advisory board, and actually we have one member of our Arizona Advisory Board here. And our advisory board members are drawn from education communities. They're either from the school districts or they're from the profession, from the boards of education. And we use the advisory board to help keep the material that we're providing the teachers current in terms of what are the significant issues that are being faced by the districts where we are serving.
So how many members are on the Arizona Advisory Board, and are they all from the Phoenix area?
Currently, I'm Lawrence Moore, and I'm actually on the Board of Trustees for Alliant International University.
I'm sorry, can you just, the only reason I ask, I don't want to be a stickler on the mic, it's just so that the live stream and we can also get it for the record.
I have such a big mouth. Anyway, my name is Lawrence Moore, and I'm on the Board of Trustees for Alliant International. We are just in the process of recruiting the advisory board for Arizona. We wanted to make sure we were into this process and understanding any questions that this committee might have. We have identified a chair, and he will help us to recruit Others, he is actively involved on Board of Education, and he will help us recruit others and determine the geographic representation.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, does the board want to hear some of the topics of the Professional Development Academies?
Is that the post?
Yes, the post.
Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So it is coursework in classroom management, instructional design, and other critical pedagogical areas for teaching in critical need subject areas. Required participant exposure, observation of same subject area teachers in neighboring schools. Video observation, analysis, and/or real-time coaching. Utilization of online content such as direct instruction, previewing, classroom content, and all classroom observations. A clearly designed curricular scope and sequence for all program participants that either includes integration of existing state performance evaluation systems or use of an equally rigorous evaluation system that utilizes the learner achievement as a preponderant criterion for determining effectiveness. Differentiation of instruction in elementary and secondary classroom. English as a second language and special education teaching diverse learners. Algebraic connections and technology in middle grades. Probability and statistics for K-8 teachers. Curriculum development. Literacy instruction in all content areas. Assessment and progress monitoring. Response to intervention and multi-tiered service delivery models. Problem-solving models. Classroom management that includes positive behavior intervention and support using the PBI methods. Cultural competency and responsibility.
Okay, thank you. No, don't go to, please. The question, I have a question about the RTI and the MTSS trainings. So is that part of the general ed support? Because is that where that comes in under? The multi and the subject and the single subject?
That is general ed.
Yeah, right. So the RTI and the MTSS is there. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Do you want to present that to them?
I kind of squashed it. I can email it to you.
Okay.
No, that's fine. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah,
Dr. Cochran, do you have any other information that you'd like to present? Because I think then the next piece would be for us to go through the criteria, the items on the program application.
Well, I could give a brief overview so we have a sufficient time to answer your specific questions. So the credential program covers K through 12. We have pedagogy courses, and we also have field experience. Field experience consists of 600 hours, and there's 4 terms. And it links the content that the students learn in their pedagogy courses to the real practice in the classroom. And I could go ahead and answer your specific questions if you'd like.
Okay. One of my primary concern in looking at the application is that no special education standards are addressed in your application. The in-task standards are primarily used at our University of Arizona at College of Education, but that's not standard across the state. We have, and in special education in Arizona, our training programs utilize the Council for Exceptional Children teaching standards. The in-task does not have the detail or the meat in it to begin to address what special educators are required to do and to provide. So that was one area of deficiency that I noted. And that came in under the program narrative, the learner development. The other concern that I had was the incorrect notation of the technology standards. As we were reviewing the application, we were searching all over the internet, and nobody could find anything about NetSet.
Yeah, that's my fault. I took a PDF and was retyping it into Word and was copying and pasting and did the acronym incorrect. So I apologize for that. Regarding and it was the national standards for education technology. So it wasn't the whatever the acronym that I messed up on.
Right. So that was a struggle.
I am so
for
sorry.
us
No.
on the evaluation because we were not able to appropriately assess. Well, we couldn't give you credit in these areas that did not provide the correct standards. Okay, so thank you for letting us know that. And then we received an email today that said that it was the ISTE standards. So that would be helpful if this is to come back around to get that correct standard notation and the correct standard numbers to go with that. Anybody else have any other questions on that? Comments? Yeah, right. We are only. I'm sorry. Did you?
So can I
Might have missed that.
pose
Yes.
a question? So the in-task, that's something that the University of Arizona is doing. Are they doing the CEC standards as well, or just the in-task for special ed?
They're using all our universities are using the Council for Exceptional Children professional standards.
Yeah, I was given in-task, and that's why I used it. But I'm happy to go back and look through with the CEC standards as well.
Thank you. We would that would really be appreciated because then you would see alignment with the courses, and we could see that alignment with those standards.
Of course, you can't really evaluate if you're not using the standards
Right.
that you want to evaluate with. So
Thank you. All right, then on to standard number 2. Does anybody have any questions about standard 2, learning differences? On the special education piece?
Give me a second.
What I did like seeing was that if a teacher candidate is working at a school that does not meet the 10% criteria for ELL and special education and low SES learners, that there was a requirement that the teacher candidate observe 2 full days in those programs for each of percentage point under 10%, so that your teacher candidates do have that experience and with the low with those subpopulations. I did like seeing that addressed. It also means that our schools are not going to be limited, and your candidates won't be limited into the schools that they can choose, if there's an accommodation for that. Mm-hmm. Joshua, did you have a
Not
question
related
on
to
that?
special education, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
sure.
We got the scope, we got how the courses are divided for each of the 3 programs sent to us earlier today. Can you speak a little bit about why with the special education programs they don't have to do the general pieces? Just in the state of Arizona, there's a lot of inclusion and a lot of co-teaching, and so there are some specialty courses and programs that just the special education teachers teach, but they don't have to take, but they don't have candidates, but they don't have to take the ones that the regular education candidates have to. And so I just was curious how they're going to get that information. So a little bit of info on that.
So are you asking how the general education teachers get instruction in special education?
The opposite.
Opposite.
So
I get it.
why there was an exclusion of some of that general education content, as so many special education teachers teach side by side with regular education teachers in Arizona.
So just to give you historical context, in California, when I was going through my credential programs a long time ago, we had to get a general ed credential before we could even get a special education credential. Mm-hmm. And the teacher shortage in special education was astronomical. Most of the teachers were operating on emergency credentials which meant you didn't even have to be in a teacher prep program. So when I started, I saw a lot of teachers who were teaching for, over a decade and didn't have a credential. So they eliminated that requirement and they started only a special education credential. Now, with that said, a lot of the competencies that you'll see, for example, lesson planning and unit planning and whole classroom management is actually embedded in the special education credential program. So it's not separate and distinct. We do also so let's take behavior management. In addition to giving a general because classroom management is vastly different than managing specific behavior for specific children. Mm-hmm. So then we also go over the students learn how to do a functional behavioral analysis and a behavior support plan and a behavior intervention plan. And they learn about manifestation determination. So they learn those pieces, but it's not exclusive in saying we don't teach, because you could be teaching a class or you could be a support in a general education class. So we do address both areas.
And we share courses, I think is the question she's asking. Some of the courses are the same, where we feel there's value for both general education and special education, and then some of the courses that are unique to special education are different. But we do share several courses to make sure that the candidates are getting both attributes.
Thank you.
From what I saw of the special education coursework, it's pretty standard for what special education teacher candidates seeking a special education certificate are taking here in the state of Arizona. We do know that most of our colleges and universities now are requiring a dual degree program, both elementary and special education or secondary. But in this kind of a program, it would be more like our master's programs in special education, where we have many people that come from other career paths and get into a master's program, and there's not general education coursework in there. So I thought that it matched up, the coursework matched up pretty well. Mentioned that there are course modules, there are course units, there are course 8-week courses. How many hours is involved in the instruction for that?
Well, for the clinical practice, overall it's 600 hours, so that's 4 courses. In terms of the pedagogy courses, do you recall the hour requirement that we have?
So it is 3, I have to calculate it. I'll give it to you in a minute.
To clarify, when you're talking clinical practice, that's time with the students.
Yeah, that's actual time.
That's the time that they're
classroom.
teaching. So it's online instruction for the pedagogical courses, face-to-face clinical practice as their interns teaching, and then the face-to-face component is just with supervisors, but there's no whole class gathering.
No, but we do have in our learning management system is Canvas, and within Canvas we have video conferencing. So we can open that up and interact with the students. In addition to the asynchronous postings and the postings of their assignments, students can also interact with instructors as well.
Thank you.
I should say too, regarding the clinical practice, we have university mentors that they're required to, for every 8-week term, they're required to do a classroom observation 3 times, followed up by a conversation with the teacher candidate, to give feedback. So they also get written feedback as well, but the mentoring and coaching occurs between the mentor and the teacher candidate 3 times per term or 12 times per year minimum. If some teacher candidates struggle more than others, and if that's the case, they can get more mentoring and coaching. The mentor and the district employed support provider they interact and meet once a term or 4 times a term, or if necessary, more. So they discuss the candidate and kind of collaborate to best support the candidate.
Are there any prerequisite coursework or connections with the universities that the teacher candidates in which they need to engage prior to actually starting in the classroom? That was not mentioned.
There is, and that's for both special education and general education. So they have a course called Pre-Service that they take, and it gives a broad overview of the competencies because they're actually walking into a classroom, so they need to have basic competencies on lesson planning, assessment, classroom management, those kind of topical areas. So
they take that class prior to actually starting in
Yeah, it's
teaching?
Actually, in California, it's an actual requirement. You have to take pre-service before you can be an intern.
So how would that look? We don't have that requirement in Arizona. So what is that going to look like then for the teacher candidates for your program? When would they start into the program? When is that course available?
It's every term ongoing, and it's free. So we don't even charge our soon-to-be students. They could take it after they get into the program, or they can take it even before they get admitted.
So as soon as they get admitted and they receive their materials, they can sign up to go into the class. So the earlier question, for the courses, each of our courses is 3 units. So for each course, typically our candidates are taking 2 courses in an 8-week term. So each course is 35 hours. So that's how it shakes out. The clinical practice ones are different because it's twice the amount of hours.
Right. Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm still trying to understand that what it's going to look like in Arizona. I understand that it's quite different in California. So can you walk us through what it's a candidate for an applicant for your program will do? How will that work? We've got, there's the intern teaching certificate. That needs to be obtained. There's the agreement with the school or the local education.
Okay.
That's
right.
So what's the sequence? What is the sequence going to look like?
So before anybody starts actually in a classroom, they do take the pre-service course to give them some basic competencies, so that, because the goal is, there is a teacher shortage, but we want them to be successful as well. We don't want them to go into a classroom and fail, so at least they have some basic understanding. And it will obviously be nothing like when they finish the program, but particularly in special education, and even in California, we have a special education, a pretty severe special education teacher shortage. So giving them the pre-service course gives them some competencies to help them. But they're also supported through a university mentor, and also we have an exceptional field experience coordinator that also can provide support.
So basically, is there any difference between the program for students who are registering in Arizona and students in California?
Well,
So we will try to, our plan is to make sure that the students in Arizona also have pre-service.
Okay.
So that they have that set of competencies under their belt, so that when they're beginning to take the pedagogy courses, they have a basic understanding of the expectations of an effective teacher.
And
so
how,
as soon as they get admitted, they will get invited to enroll in that pre-service course.
And that's a 6-week course.
Thank you. That's how long? A 6-week course. Okay. Thank you. We can continue on then. We can go on then to Standard 3, the learning environment. Are there any questions? On Standard 3?
Your application, I didn't come to an understanding of how collaborative learning is taught in terms of an approach for your teachers. How do you teach your teacher candidates how to implement collaborative learning practices in the classroom?
It's both done in the pedagogy courses and in the field experience. So special education by its very nature is collaborative through the individual education program process. So the students, they are required to, in their clinical practice courses, they're required to interact with the different players on an IEP team, speech and language therapist, occupational therapist, adapted PE teacher, educational psychologist, counselor, program specialist, the different people that they work with as a part of their job.
I'm thinking more of a student-to-student types of collaboration within the actual learning environment in the classroom. How do you all teach that?
How does
So we have I'm blanking out on the course, but Dr. Block, who's on the phone, probably knows what the course is. So in addition to the clinical practice where they have to submit self-reflections of what they've done in the collaborative environment, they are also expected to post various activities based on assignments that have to do with working collaboratively. I don't remember the name of the course.
Are you referencing the teacher candidates or their students?
I'm talking about their students. So the standard calls for the teacher to work with others
right.
to create environments that support individual and collaborative learning.
Yes.
That means for their students.
Yes.
And that encourages. So I thought where I got like strong evidence was around your focus on PBIS for encouraging positive social interaction. I did get some evidence around active engagement in learning, not as much as the positive social interaction. So for this to be stronger for me, what I'm looking for is, what is your approach to making sure that your teachers can go into a classroom, create a learning environment where students are collaborating, where they are self-motivated, and where they are engaged in interesting learning tasks?
So it's
I believe those are in the teacher performance expectations because they have to report on those.
It's multifaceted. So the first thing is we teach the least restrictive environment. So special education is not a location, it's a service. And the vast majority of the students are included in general education. As part of their clinical practice requirements, they're supposed to see different settings. And the general education classroom with special education students included is one of those. We also, and we do teach the least restrictive environment for not only for an appropriate education, but for social benefit. I mean, that's one of the 4 factors of LRE. So the students are taught this.
Yeah, I apologize for interrupting. I'm a special education teacher, so I understand everything about LRE and all of those things. What I'm really asking you to get to the heart of here is, how do you teach your teacher candidates to create a learning environment where students are working together collaboratively, learning from each other, where they are engaged in a learning environment where they are doing the critical thinking, the heavy lifting, the learning together, where they're self-motivated, where they're engaged?
So I'm going to give an overview, and then if I may, I'm going to ask Dr. Donna Block, who actually teaches a couple of these courses, to speak up.
Yes.
So those are found in the methodology courses for our candidates, both sides, and then the candidates themselves, what they're bringing back from their classrooms, which is an observation of their learners, their students, That is outlined in a form that they bring back. It's also outlined in their e-journals that they have to provide to their mentors, and in terms of the special assignments that they have to do. Dr. Block, if you're there, I'd like you to elaborate what I'm describing here.
Well, let me also contribute to that. So I understand your question better now. So what you're asking is how do we engage our students, student-to-student, general ed, special education together?
Or even if it's just special ed student,
how do you engage them?
Yeah,
so that is through methodology. So we do teach, as I said, lesson planning, using multi-sensory instruction, and tailoring instruction to the student's unique needs. So oftentimes students, they aren't engaged because maybe it's not good instruction. It's not addressing their learning style, or it's not taking in consideration a special need that's not being addressed. So if the student isn't comprehending or not learning in the best way for them, they'll be disengaged.
Something that I noticed in going through the application, all three courses, programs, was that there seemed to be a blending or a confusion between standards and these standards that apply to the learners, what the teachers know about learners and instruction and pedagogy, and then what the teachers are expected to know and do professionally. There was that blend, and we saw that there's another item coming up, and I think we're back. We're kind of in that what the teachers are supposed to know about, as opposed to how are they going to teach. What instruction are the teachers receiving in collaborative practices among the students in their classroom? And so I was wondering, you mentioned, Doctor, that there was some of the general ed courses were also being taken by the special ed students.
The methodology courses address what you're asking, which has to do with the learners themselves. And in the methodology courses, what the candidates bring back, I'm going to try to use the word candidates and the learners to differentiate. So the candidates are expected to bring back in their evaluations what's happening with the learners. And we have a series of teacher performance expectations, which includes that collaborative learning, includes social attention, motivation, and all of that. They're supposed to bring back to their university mentor and into the classroom assignments to demonstrate that not only have they acquired the pedagogy in the methodology class, but they've actually applied it while they were in the classroom. I think that's where we went a little confused there.
Could you give us the course number in which the collaboration is taught? Maybe our professor on the phone could identify the course number that we could find that in the application.
So is Lisa Mauricio or Donna Block on the phone?
I believe we're both here on the phone.
Okay, can one of you address the course number?
For special education
or
gen ed?
For the courses where our candidates are learning how to make sure that their learners are engaging in collaborative learning and social interaction and motivation and all of those things. I believe it's the methodology courses for both elementary and secondary, as well as some of the technical courses. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. In elementary, that would be EDU 6035. And for secondary, that's EDU 6828. And both of those courses very much focus on how teachers can go into their classroom and implement a huge amount of strategies that we go over in both of those classes that are very specific to the groups that they're teaching.
And so which of those courses do the special education teacher candidates participate in?
So I would look at EDU 6862, that's teaching the English language learner in a mild moderate setting. EDU 6813B, curriculum and instruction, math pedagogy, and I would look at those courses. You might want to look at EDU 6813A as well. That's another curriculum and instruction course.
This is Donna Block. Definitely the 6813A as well.
Okay. Curriculum, reading, pedagogy. Okay, it just, from what I'm seeing, it just does not, there's not an emphasis here in collaboration. It just, the language is not evident. You know your coursework, you know your instruction, but it just is not. I just don't see that it's listed. But thank you for being patient with us while we sought that out. Any other questions on Standard 3?
No.
Standard 4. Again, California references teacher performance expectations. I think TPE, that must be California language, and then also we see the TPA. That must also be California. We don't have that language here. We don't have those principles. So it's...
May I, Madam Chair?
Yes.
So those are our assessment categories that we look at the competencies that the teachers need to have in the areas that I had on the board earlier. So those are all the teacher performance expectation areas that we use to collect the data from, and that teachers are expected to provide feedback and that they're evaluated on. It's our assessment method.
So is it a California assessment, or is it Alliant International University?
It is a combination of Alliant. It's mostly Alliant International University. It's a set of competencies that we felt were important for the alternative certification track in order for us to make sure that our candidates are progressing along the way in understanding what competencies and proficiencies they need to master.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
It's
Thank
what
you.
we currently use to collect our data.
Thank you. That clarifies that for me. Any other questions?
We're still on Standard 3.
Pardon me?
Are we still on Standard 3?
We're on Standard 4.
Standard 4 now. Okay, hold on. I'm just trying to catch up with my scoring here.
Are you ready to move on to 5, or you need time to get to 4?
Just 2 minutes, maybe. Maybe not even that long. I just wanted to make sure I don't have any other questions. Standard 5.
4?
Yeah.
I
have no questions on Standard 4.
No questions on 4? Okay, thank you. We'll go on to Standard 5, application of content. What I saw here in this one, this was that what I was referring to earlier about the confusion. The standard is the teacher understands how to connect concepts and use differing perspectives to engage learners in critical thinking, creativity, and collaborative problem solving related to authentic and global issues. As I read through the application, this section, I did not see much evidence of engaging learners in critical thinking, creativity, and collaborative problem solving, but there was discussion of and extensive information on self-reflection, differentiation, and reflection of the teacher candidates. Mm-hmm. This standard specifically was about how the teacher candidates are going to work with the students and develop the critical thinking, collaborative problem solving, creativity among the students. Yeah. So that I didn't see that it was addressed in that section.
I also agree with that sentiment. I actually rated this as 0. I did not see any evidence about how the coursework develops teacher candidates effectively in the areas of engaging learners, not teacher candidates, in critical thinking. This also led me to some other questions that may also have to do with special education teachers, but also just any teacher in general. If we're thinking about the application of content, I think we could also go back to the standard 2, which is the learning differences. I'm still, a question I still have about your program is, I got lots of evidence that you all can, I think, focus on the pedagogy around special education. I just didn't see a lot of evidence around how are you making sure that teacher candidates can be community relevant and culturally relevant in their approach to students. And so I just had questions around that from not only standard 2, but also in this current standard as well.
Can I jump in on that?
Go ahead.
This is Lisa. I did want to address in terms of, we do use a standardized lesson plan format across all of our programs. And in that format, we specifically do, and when we're teaching them lesson planning, we specifically have them go over the Bloom's taxonomy, both the old version and the new revised version. And then we have them be very specific in terms of our candidates, be specific in terms of what strategies and what exactly they're doing in their classroom to get students to reach, like the specified Bloom's taxonomy that they're using in their lesson. I may have misunderstood, but that's one way in which we ensure that it's trickling, or it's, going to the students, and the students are the ones who are benefiting from the instruction that we provide to their teachers.
Okay, thank you. Well, that kind of leads out. When we get to that part of the application, I had questions about the lesson plan format because it was very confusing, and it looked like it might have suffered from a unintended format change. It didn't make a lot of sense. But as we're going through the application, we can only read the standards and then the text, the narrative that's inserted to try for us to make sense of it. This is such a it's a big document. It's so much work. And we truly appreciate the work and effort that Alliant International University has done. But that's what we're looking for when we're looking to evaluate and assess. We're just looking for the answers to those questions.
So I certainly, when your initial question was about general ed and special education and how do our special education candidates get trained in general ed. So I understand where you're going with this. I do think the lesson planning is where you see the bulk of that. There are lesson plans that's required throughout the program. But in terms of the depth of that, both programs are a year, and special education does have to address all the special education elements. So it's probably not as deep in the general ed as you would see in special ed program for general ed students, but it is addressed because and teaching methodology, if you go through the courses, collaborative learning is like an age-old strategy. So we do teach collaborative learning as well. Our mentors, when they're viewing the teacher candidates' observations, they do give feedback on the classroom instruction. Yeah. So that's where you see in the actual clinical practice element, but they also get lesson planning. And I understand what you're saying. You see that lesson plan format. We're actually, right now, I'm revising the lesson plan format for special education and using Grant Wiggins.
Sure.
So we're going in that direction and dropping the current, and I'm actually in progress right now developing that. So the where to of Grant Wiggins.
Okay, thank you.
So
I'm sorry.
I think that what didn't come through is kind of how the lesson plan comes alive in the classroom and where the teachers are demonstrating the critical thinking and the collaboration and problem solving, because that gets collected on the evaluation form that the mentor uses to grade the candidate on. And then they have a conversation about what transpired in the classroom.
And a challenge for us is that none of those forms were included in your application. So we couldn't see what the mentors, or how the candidates are being assessed, and what the mentors are looking for in terms of student behaviors and teacher candidate behaviors in the classroom. So that was just difficult for us. We could not make I think an adequate assessment based on what the information that you're giving us today. Okay, are there any other questions on Standard 5?
No.
Let's go on to Standard 6, assessment. I did see that the criteria was met, understanding multiple methods of assessment. I did appreciate that there were a number of assessments that were provided, the standard assessments that are used throughout special education. Variety are available to the teachers to use to select, and that would go with the district or the school they're attending. Anybody else have any questions about number 6? Josh?
I have questions.
What?
So my initial review, I came to the conclusion that I felt that there was a strong focus on assessment for special education teachers. However, the standard itself says that the teacher understands and uses multiple methods of assessment to engage learners in their own growth, to monitor learner progress, and to guide the teachers' and learners' decision making. How does the coursework develop candidates engaging and investing learners in their own growth? How are candidates taught to track data and use the data for decision making?
So are we talking about the assessment for the IEP process and IEP goals and developments?
So I'm talking about how do your special education teachers, or any teacher for that matter, how are they using the data that they're collecting from assessments to engage their learners with that information so that their learners are actively engaged with that information, using it to monitor their own growth? And how are both the teachers and the learners, the teacher candidates and their learners, using that information to make decisions for themselves?
So again, that is collected, and I'm going to ask Donna to comment, Dr. Block to comment. That is collected in the observation logs. There are several of them, and the feedback forms that the mentor and the teacher discuss, as well as provide feedback on how the candidate can go back and improve in the classroom. And depending on where the candidate is, they sometimes will bring in the school district mentor teacher as well, to have that triangulated conversation. It does happen, but it happens for us in the clinical practice and in the feedback mechanism in the clinical practice, because the clinical practice is where we put a lot of emphasis into really trying to understand how the teachers are applying the content in the classroom and how the learners are reacting to the content that's being applied. And that's where we have the bulk of our practice evidence type things and feedback that the candidate would use to improve in terms of their instruction and engaging the learners.
I would also add, we talk about differentiated instruction, but we didn't really talk about differentiated assessment. So, for example, I'll just give you an example. Let's say you have a student that has a deficit in fine motor skills and is challenging in terms of writing, but you're trying to assess that student's level of knowledge in a certain content area. We do teach our teacher candidates to look at what you're assessing the student is on one thing and another thing. So a deficit in fine motor skills, that's not what you're assessing. You're assessing something else. So that is in the instruction. If I'm getting your question right, I'm not sure if I am, but.
This is Donna Block. In one of our courses, the pre-service course, we have a discussion or an assignment. I can't remember which one it is, but it talks about asking teacher candidates how they take their assessment, the assessments they've gone through with their students, and teach their students how to set small goals, so that they can make improvements in the future.
And that's what we would be looking to see as a response in this section.
Yeah.
But again, the pre-service course was not mentioned in your application.
Or was briefly mentioned, but not,
Yeah, didn't have that discussion.
It wasn't articulated.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions on 6? Then we can go to standard number 7, planning for instruction. Any questions there?
I do have one. The program that if approved, where would you be implementing this program? Throughout all of Arizona? Are you going to be focusing on a particular area?
No, just like in California, we do it throughout the entire state. So we would be open for the entire state of Arizona.
Okay.
But we primarily target underserved areas. We start with underserved areas first.
Okay. A piece that was missing for me, if it's throughout the entire state of Arizona, was just the part that was regarding community context, specifically regarding experiences of kids in Arizona, et cetera. And so it wasn't mentioned in the application of how candidates would learn about teaching students in Arizona specifically. A little bit about, I was curious if you could speak to that a little bit, about what the plan would be to develop that, or what the plan has been to do that.
So we have been working and continuing to look at the standards, taking it from your websites and trying to look at the various standards and looking at our curriculum to make sure that it's relevant for Arizona. And we do, our next iteration was to look at, just like in any state, different areas are going to have different needs. And so we had begun to think about which areas we would target first. And so we would look at underserved areas in Phoenix, and then we would get that right. And then we would look at another underserved area, maybe in a rural area, and we would get that right. So that's kind of the thought process we were having.
So can you speak to how currently in California the community context portion is addressed?
So the community context, we usually find a liaison that we work with. And so we also have our university mentors, a representative from various areas of the state. We have a training for them. We have a seminar for them to talk about the expectations of what the candidates should be able to do, and also to talk about the issues that are unique to school districts so that they understand what it is we're looking to make sure that our candidates are proficient at. So we're very much community engaged. We are of the community. We also, I'd mentioned earlier that we have members of the community, various stakeholders, serve as advisory board members, so that we make sure we are touching on all the stakeholders that we need to have. We develop very strong relationships with the school districts, with the principals. We don't just come and say our students are taking your courses, but we actually have a conversation about expectations. So we approach it first as a relationship building, and then when the candidates get into the schools, we kind of are all aligned and have a common vision, a shared vision of what we're trying to do. So that's what we would be looking to do in Arizona.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions on Standard 6? Let's go on to standard 7. Planning
that
for...
That was 7.
That was 7, excuse me. Okay. There we go. Standard 8, instructional strategies. Are there any questions for the team about 8? I just thought that was fine. Mm-hmm. Standard 9, professional learning and ethical practice. Any questions there? Comments?
I will say that I thought that there was a lot of evidence of interaction amongst mentors and district liaisons and pushing candidates to be reflective of what their work to others. So I just want to point out, because I know that I'm being pretty critical, which is my job. But I also want to make sure I point out areas where I thought you all are doing some strong work, and that is, I think, in this area of pushing your teacher candidates to be very reflective about their practice once they're in the clinical experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I agree the reflectiveness. I just and you spoke just a little bit to it. I work supporting educators. I'm just a little bit concerned with the district liaisons and the principal liaisons, and the fact that a lot of the standards, even the lesson plans, are going to be completely different. I got my credential in California, so I understand a lot of the pre-service, et cetera, but my concern is with such small school districts that are running things so differently, that what may happen, and I know a lot of educators who experience this, is that they're all speaking different languages. So if they're in a master's program and they're an alt-ed teacher, and then the district, you have 3 very different places where they're not all aligned. And it's a lot of anxiety and responsibility on those educators. And I see principals being pushed to the limit as it is. And so when you say district liaison, who is that? Who pays for them? Who is that? Who is that person, I guess?
So that's one of our lead mentors. It's not really the responsibility of the district, but we collectively agree that this is a good liaison for us, depending on the school district. Some of our districts, we share the liaison, some of our smaller districts, but we go through a process of really vetting what is unique to the district and what is needed. So we don't just pick somebody, or we don't just put it on the principal. Most times the principal is not actually involved on the day-to-day. Most often it is the teachers in the classroom who has observed something, the mentor teacher, who brings forth a concern that then it's triangulated with these people. So it's not something that we ask the small districts to undertake the burden of it. So I understand what you're saying completely, that principals are pushed to the limit and not wanting to put this extra burden. We also are very much about our candidates being kind of engaged in their learning, and that means that collaboratively they have to reach out to people in the district that have a stake in what they're trying to do. So sometimes candidates will bring forth people to us that they want involved in our discussions, so to inform our discussions about who the liaison should be. But that liaison is accountable to us, so that we are making sure that everybody is aligned. If we have 3 people, we want to make sure we are aligned on what our expectations are.
So there's a district liaison that works for you.
Yes.
Then there's a mentor that works for you.
Yeah.
And both of them will collaboratively be working with site leadership and or district leadership to support this person.
Correct.
Okay.
In California, if you're on a student teacher track, you'll have a master teacher or a mentoring teacher. So we have a district employed support provider in California that also works with our university mentor and our field experience coordinator.
I forgot that. We also have a field experience coordinator who ties up everybody who's involved in this.
Yeah, I think my questions and concerns are just very different than California. Our school districts are extremely small, very local control, a lot of questions and answers at the site level versus when I went through my program, San Francisco Unified, there's one person, and so I've seen new educators struggle with this, that there's so many people telling them to go different ways without a target. It's a struggle. So I just wanted to wrap my head around how your program.
Sure, and we have some of our rural districts actually exactly the way you're describing it, where the school personnel is really small. And so we try to work around that by making sure that the field experience coordinator is understanding the dynamics in the school district. So we don't have a one-size-fits-all approach because all the districts are different.
Right.
Okay.
I think it sounds more complex. It's really the university mentor works with the student and the district employed support provider, mentoring teacher, whatever you want to call it. And our coordinator is the one that she was very much facing the university mentor and monitoring via Canvas how they're doing and interacting with them on an ongoing basis. So really it's the university mentor that is facing your candidate, your teacher candidate, and the school site.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on Standard 10?
9. Or I think we're 8.
Pardon me?
9.
That was 9.
All right, we're on 10.
Excuse me, I'm just making all my notes. Standard 10, leadership and collaboration. What I liked about this one, I really appreciated the thoughtful and thought-provoking projects that really are going to show the depth of learning of the teacher candidates. I thought that was a strong point in your application. Anybody else have comments about 10? Okay.
I think I've mentioned this with other programs. It's really hard to recreate, because part of this is learning how to collaborate and work with other people. And so it's really tricky to do that with video conferencing. And so if the candidates are never in the same space together, so a question may be, do the folks, the district support folks, do they attend? Very clearly, there are observations that happen within the classroom context. Do those observations take place in PLCs or in departments in order to provide the candidates with support in working with their colleagues?
Yes, it's a combination. And we also, to answer your earlier part of the question, we do provide seminars for them to make sure that they are creating environments where candidates can find opportunities to interact with one another. So, for example, in some of our districts, you find a concentration of candidates. So there are opportunities for the mentor to engage with the candidates, particularly in the clinical practice, in a more group setting, even though some of the work is done with video conferencing, but there are opportunities for our candidates to engage.
For all candidates? Or just locations where there's a cluster?
For all candidates. There's an expectation of engagement. There's an expectation of engagement. Even in the online environment, there's an expectation of engagement.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Then we are on to the application and review process. Any questions about that, describing the application and review process for persons enrolling in the program?
Yes, I have a question. So I saw lots of evidence about how people enroll in your program. What I didn't see addressed was how you all review those candidates or those initial people who sign up for the program. How do you determine if they're a high-quality candidate? What does that review process look like? What are your acceptance rates? How many people do you not allow into your program?
I'll let you.
So we do both a paper review and then there's an interview of the candidates. And then I don't remember how many we don't accept into the program.
Yeah, that's
but because they go through, it's a several stage process to get accepted into the program. It's the paper, it's the making sure. I know in Arizona the Constitution is important. There's a checklist of everything that they need to have, and then it gets turned over to a faculty review process using a rubric. And then we also talk about disposition a little bit.
Yeah, so they have to write a letter of introduction that gets reviewed. There's a dispositional form that is a check. Obviously, that's not shared with the candidate, but that's checked off by admissions when they apply.
Yeah.
There's a GPA requirement, a minimum GPA for entry. They have to pass. Well, in California, you have to pass the C best.
Yeah.
Do you guys have? What's your assessment here, or do you have one?
No. We don't have that. No.
Okay. So those are
different organizations have different rules, but
I think we addressed the test somewhere in here, the Arizona test. That's where I got the Arizona Constitution.
Yeah. Those are baseline requirements. I'm thinking of other alternative certification organizations, though, that have a bar for acceptance. So that way, someone who does not have the right disposition is not put into a program where they're ultimately going to not succeed. So I think where your application could be stronger is, in addition to showing the process that one follows to enroll, I would put evidence of how you review each candidate before they enter into the course before acceptance.
I think that's in the faculty interview.
Okay.
And I think you're telling us this.
You're telling us it's not in your application.
In the application process for us to be able to make a good evaluation of that for you. Okay. The next item is the enrollment application forms. Again, no forms were attached. It mentioned the program and degree roadmap, and I would like to have seen that. But it wasn't there, so that was a hard one to score. That was difficult for us to score.
A recommendation might be to just put those forms online somewhere and just put a hyperlink into the application. Each one.
The next item, the district and school participants. There was not evidence that advanced work had been done in Arizona to engage districts. Now, you're talking about it today, but at the time of the submission of the application, it wasn't there. So had you reached out to districts in Arizona?
Yeah, we've started to reach out. We have a couple of almost near liaisons, I think we're calling them, that we're working with. But we wanted to see how this goes before we went full force. Because once we started talking to them, they had lots of questions. And we couldn't really answer a lot of questions. Yeah.
That absolutely makes sense.
All right.
The next item is describing the length of time the candidate will be required to participate in a supervised school-based experience, including any orientation. I thought that was clearly stated. It's a 32-week program at most, and
there was a portion in part of the application that said that the internship certificate, or that it could extend into a second year. And so I was curious what that was in reference to, because it did say that the program on the intern cert could be a year or two, and I was curious what the or two was.
If they wanted to get a master's degree, then it would be more than a year.
Okay.
Sometimes students choose to go slower. I mean, they could finish the credential in a year, but if they choose to take less courses, it could take them longer. It's up to them.
So they have an option?
Yeah.
You made a reference to the fact that Arizona has a 3-year, am I wrong about that?
The intern?
3-year intern
the intern
certificate. With a possibility of 3.
2 with possibility of 3.
Possibility of 3 was in the application.
It was in the application?
Well, the Arizona has a 3-year. We have a 2-year maximum intern.
So you're focusing on 2 years. Okay, I just want to make sure. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. The next one, explaining the structure and supervision of an evaluation. Here again is what's an administrative service credential or a clear credential? We don't. Are you talking about a principal or superintendent or a supervisor? I mean, these are the 3 administrative certificates we have in Arizona, but I don't know what a clear credential is.
So that's again in California, you have 5 years to clear your preliminary credential. If you don't do that, your preliminary credential is invalid. So it's additional coursework, and it's usually done by school districts and county office of ed for continuous to help candidates or teachers at that point to stay in the field and be successful. It's ongoing instruction and mentorship.
This section would really need to be updated for Arizona because we don't have a provisional certificate any longer.
Yeah, so we actually noticed even yesterday when we went to the website, some things have changed. So our plan is to make sure that we have somebody who is paying attention to the changes in Arizona. We even noticed there was a middle certification. We didn't see that
correct,
before.
yeah.
So we want to make sure we are on top of the changes. So that would be our plan of action.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and the certificate names and your program names just need to match Arizona. We don't have multiple subjects. Yeah. We have elementary, and that's all we've ever had since I've been here in '75. We have secondary high school secondary certificates that are grades now 6 through 12 and that are subject specific. The mild moderate, got that one. We do have that certificate. The next, explaining how the school-based supervised experiences will promote effectiveness of the candidates. And anybody have any questions on that one? That was clear. Then again, the forms. The forms in the brief description, the forms were listed, but we didn't see evidence of them as we're used to seeing the forms actually in the program. A common practice is just have hyperlinks.
Okay. That worked well.
So that was difficult to score. The staff roles, responsibilities, and credentials, you had everybody listed. That was great. Thank you. Appreciate seeing names and hearing the voices on the phone. Thank you. The comments from the time to complete the program, that also was clear. Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned that earlier in your discussion that it's a flexible program. It's offered in 8-week segments. But depending upon the unique circumstances of each of the candidates, there's flexibility for them to delay that, which is why it can go on to a year or 2 or more to meet that. Now, the committee members, I'm moving this along, so if you see anything and you have any comments, just please call out. The student success and evaluation tracking, that seemed to meet it.
I had a question. What if someone's not on track?
So the Student Evaluation Review Committee operates as an early warning. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the student can be sent before this committee for a variety of reasons, and that committee looks at them and develops a remediation plan to make sure that the candidate gets back on track. For the most part, candidates will get back on track because it is a very serious conversation about any areas that need improvement. I think it's working very well for us.
Thank you.
You want me to add to that as well?
Yeah.
So our program directors are included in the online courses, so we can see how students are doing in their coursework. Also, our field experience coordinator is also closely linked to the university mentors, and the work that that's uploaded into the learning management system is viewable by the university's field experience coordinator. So in terms of finding or identifying struggling students, there's multiple layers. You have a program director, a field experience coordinator, a university mentor, and of course we have academic advisors
as well.
And oftentimes the students will call the academic advisor on their own volition. Sometimes even before there's we actually see a issue in their academics or their performance, because there's personal things going on that they're already feeling that they're maybe not be successful. So we all communicate with each other for identification, and then if we see students that are struggling, they do get referred to, in School of Ed we call it the Credential Review Committee, the CRC, and that's made up of faculty and staff, and they identify the issues, they interact with the teacher candidate, and the teacher candidate is able to talk to them, and then there's an action plan to help them be successful.
Okay, thank you. The next one, tracking and evaluation documents. You did give us a list, but it sure would have been so helpful to have seen the documents themselves and see the contents. And I think that would have clarified a lot of the questions that we have today had we been able to look at the forms, and then we could have, when looking at the forms, we could have taken it back to perhaps an earlier question. The program success. What I saw was missing from there was there was no consideration given to the participating schools and districts for their input. It was about the university folks and the participants. I just missed. Did I miss that? I kept looking for it.
Is that a feature of your program?
We have an evaluation system that the school gives back to us.
Mm-hmm.
The school district gives back
Okay.
to us. Yeah. And we take that very seriously.
Yeah, so the mentoring or the district employed support providers, they also evaluate the candidate, and they're the ones that, remember, they need to meet with our university mentors a minimum of 4 times a year. So that's where that collaboration comes in, and there's assessments on the performance of the candidate by both the district employed support provider and the university mentor, and they both have to agree in order for the candidate to get credit for clinical practice.
Okay. Do you have a question? No. Well, that brings us to the end of the first one. This is the special education program support. The others, in going through this process, each of the items, we have so much information on the next 2, so it's not going to be this grueling. This really was the toughest one, and I am glad we did it first. So, Catcher, what do you want us to do next? Are we go on, or?
Madam Chair, members, it's really up to the members of the committee. If you have the scores for that program ready to go, you can give them to me and I can start compiling them, and then we can move on to the other programs, or if you're not ready, we can wait till after and then I can compile them then. Or if they're the same as scores you've already submitted to me, then you don't have to do anything and I'll just assume that. So
I've got changes on mine.
Okay. I emailed you.
I can email this update.
I have all 3 on one document.
Me too, so I can put it on a separate one.
Yeah, we can wait then if you just want to
okay.
go through the rest. And then, is that, all right, we'll wait and I'll compile them at the end of the next.
All right, that'd be good.
I understood single subject because I have a single subject.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, I did that. Yeah.
So, can we go on, since we did the special education, can we go on to the multiple subject, or it's really what we know as the elementary?
Yeah.
Okay, then folks, did we have any questions about the financial stability, we didn't talk about this in the first one, but I just did have a question because we didn't see any evidence that there'd been outreach in Arizona. We saw that there were problems with the Mexico program, and so there was significant loss. And my question for Alliant International University is, if there's not been a lot of groundwork in Arizona, is this a program, once approved, would be soliciting teacher candidates before those relationships are established, and then what would happen to them? That was just my one concern.
So we've actually began establishing the relationships, but we didn't want to go too far before going through this process.
Right.
We actually have Mr. Thomas Wright here is our community engagement liaison. So we've started that process, and we think that we can get that done very quickly. Here we value the relationship building. It's a critical component of recruiting candidates because the candidates are going to be part of the community.
Right. Thank you very much. I just did want to put that out there because we did note that. Okay, then we can go on to Standard 1, Learner Development. Anybody have any questions about the program there? Standard 2, Learning Differences. I think it's a very strong component of your program that you don't limit the opportunities for which schools candidates can attend, in which they can work, but they do have that requirement to spend those times in the other types of districts.
I still have one question about learning differences. How do you, so the standard says the teacher uses understanding of individual differences and diverse cultures and communities. How does your program address teaching your teacher candidates to be attentive to diverse communities and to cultural differences?
So our Go ahead, Lisa.
Sorry, I can go ahead and answer that. So our candidates all take a course called Education 6004, Educational Foundation. And actually that pretty much the whole focus is a lot about looking at your students, what areas they come from, how do you understand home culture, how do you take those kinds of knowledge and their own cultural capital and utilize that in the classroom. So that course, besides just being an Educational Foundations course, that's really embedded, and that's one of the first courses that they take with us. So it covers, making connections with them culturally, because a lot of times we do know that a lot of teachers don't always see the same cultural areas that they're from. So we spend a lot of time talking about those differences, how you come into the teaching profession, maybe our own biases, and how do we look at that and overcoming, or, educating ourselves, but then going into the classroom.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Let's go on to the next standard. 3. Any questions about standard 3? No. How about standard 4, content knowledge? Standard 5, application of content. See how much better it was? We got all that other work out of the way. Thank you for your patience. Standard 5. Any other questions? Okay. Standard 6, assessment. I just saw the same comment as before. It seems to focus on the assessment of the general education teacher candidates by supervisors and the capacity for self-reflection rather than an explanation of what the candidates are learning about assessing their students. And that was the same, similar comment to what we had before.
Yeah, I could actually do that piece. I think the question, if I'm understanding it correctly, is how do we teach our teachers to use multiple assessments of their students?
Of and with their students.
I mean, with their students, correct.
Yeah.
So most of our coursework, so specifically in Education 6112, which is the Applied Linguistics Seminar, teaching reading across the content areas, we actually focus a couple of weeks on different modes of assessment. So looking at how can you assess multiple learners in a variety of ways. How do you differentiate your assessment for different students? What other multiple means of assessments you can use? The regular, tests. That maybe there's ways to do it through like oral presentations, giving students choices, things like that. So that's actually really heavily covered in, I would say, in all of our pedagogy courses.
Okay, that just wasn't mentioned in Standard 6, the response to Standard 6. I do see that it is over in the response to Standard 8. Okay, thank you.
I think it just was maybe put into that standard, but,
all right,
but it's definitely there.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that clarification.
Actually, I have something to add there. I'm Dr. Sonia Arnott, and we do have a whole seminar that is on assessment and grading, and some of the assessments they have there is Introduction to Assessment Types, looking at a case study of assessment in their school, looking at grading and fair grading, looking at English language learners, really data-driven instruction reflection, looking at the ELL needs in assessment, and in the end, really putting together their project on smarter and balanced assessment. So they do this through assignments as well as in the...
Any questions there? Number 8, instructional strategies. Did we have any questions? I did note that I thought that the narrative was weak on describing instructional strategies for the general education curriculum. It certainly was there for the special education, but I just thought it was a little weak on describing and actually describing the instructional strategies. If that makes sense. All right, go on to Standard 9, professional learning and ethical practice. Did anybody have any questions about that standard?
No, but once again, I just want to, I think, make the point that all of the documents that you've sort of embedded within the application itself, I would just make the recommendation that you hyperlink to the actual documents because they're kind of difficult to follow and hard to read.
Standard 9. Standard 10.
No.
Any other questions about 10? And then how about on the next section, the application and review process is very similar to the other.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
No.
On that, enrollment application forms, district and school participants, describing the length of time the candidates will be required to participate. That was clear. Mm-hmm. Explaining the structure, supervision, and evaluation of the school-based experiences. Explaining how the supervised school-based experience will promote effectiveness of the candidate. Other questions? The forms, again, any other questions there? Staff roles, responsibilities, and credentials. Time to complete the program. Student success and evaluation tracking. Tracking evaluation documents. And program success. No changes there? Okay. Do you have any adjustments to the scores?
No.
Okay. The last one. The single subject or our secondary certificate. Any other comments about the first page on financial stability? We'll talk about that. Program description standard 1. Any questions there? The standard 2, learning differences. Standard 3, learning environments. Standard 4, content knowledge.
This was one I had a couple questions on. So it spoke in the application that there were going to be these general content areas that were going to be covered. In Arizona, I know for our certification purposes in science and in social studies, they're different, like they're broken out. Mm-hmm. And so that was a big kind of missing link for me, is the how your content knowledge coursework will be articulated. Mm-hmm. And you're all on the certification committee to speak to that too.
Well, I know when I got my single subject social studies, I had to take specific social studies curriculum and instruction. I saw math and foreign language and English. Yeah,
however.
But I did not see the other content. So is this a secondary credential program for any specific one, or only for the 4 that were? I guess that's right. We have to, yeah.
So we were looking at only the ones we identified.
Okay.
So, and I will say, single subject method. The 6828, they do take methods in their particular content area.
Okay.
So that is a specialized course in their content. It's not just general.
This might be a complete process question that Member Garcia might be able to better answer, but are all of those specific content courses under the same course number?
A, B, C, and so on and so forth.
So, yeah, I would wonder if certification unit would be we don't know if this is English, or we don't know if this is math, or we don't know if this is social studies, if it's all under the same number.
The assignments, it's broken out, and the assignments are also different.
Could be. I think, like I said, it's like a process question. It might be something to think about later.
Yeah.
Lisa?
On their transcript, it states what single subject area they took it in.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So even though it's just one general, it's all broken out in sections.
All right. Thank you. Standard 5, application of content. Standard 6, assessment. Standard 7, planning for instruction. Standard 8, instructional strategies. Standard 9, professional learning and ethical practices. Standard 10, leadership and collaboration. As far as the remaining items, were there any questions about any of the remaining 3 pages of evaluation? I think the standard, being sure that we hit every standard for learning was important, but for the other remaining, are there any other questions? No, I don't have any either. All right. Thank you very much. That concludes our questions. Is there any other information that you'd like to provide to the committee?
Not at this time, except that we will be more than happy to send the forms to you in a more appropriate fashion. We thank you for having us here this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Oh, we thank you very much for coming, for being with us, for being concerned about the state of our lack of teachers that exists, and for looking to do something to help the state of Arizona and our students. Thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate this. right, so at this point, we're going to take a recess while the staff compile the results. Thank you. wanted to wait for our fifth committee member to return. Okay, thank you, everybody. The Alternative Educator Preparation Application Review Committee is reconvening now that the results of the reviews have been tallied. Catcher, could you please give us the results?
Madam Chair, members, so the averaged scores across the three programs for the special education program, it was an average of 1.46. For the multiple subject program, it was an average of 1.49. And for the single subject program, it was an average of 1.48. And as a reminder, a score of 2 is meets. And so those are all below meets. And all of that information, regardless of what the committee recommends one way or the other, will be provided to the board at their September meeting. So all of that, as well as some of the notes that we were taking, will try to be compiled for the board. So what staff would recommend now as the next step is potentially a motion on either approval or denial based on those scores and the discussions and what we had today. And then depending on the outcome of that motion and vote, then I can talk about options after that, or Madam Chair, you can.
All right, thank you. All right, then I'm going to call for a motion regarding the recommendation of this committee for the three programs that brought to us by Alliant International University.
I move that the committee recommend to the board to reject the applications in all three areas at this time.
Second?
Second.
Second by Kristen. Thank you very much. All those in favor?
That was discussion.
Pardon me? Is there discussion?
So
okay.
I just wanted to say that the reason I made the motion to recommend rejection is I think what would have made the difference for me is making sure that the application. One, I might just break down the application into three separate applications or four, depending on how you want to approach this. But I would just make sure that your professional standards are aligned to what we use here in Arizona. I'm going to use the word standard again. I would look at each standard that's in the application itself and make sure that you're providing very specific evidence for each part. And then, I would just make sure that, one of the things that is making me recommend this causing me to make this motion is it just isn't Arizona specific in certain places where it needs to be. So that's why I believe the committee should vote to recommend a rejection at this time.
Any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. So now the next part, though, and thank you for giving your reasons, because the next section is what can we do to make recommendations that the Alliant International University can, if they so desire, bring back the application. If that is the decision, we want to give you recommendations. As Ketcher had said, this recommendation goes to the State Board of Education. They make the final decision, but then we can also provide some recommendations to you.
Yes, and Madam Chair, members, so similar to how we did with the other application that came in front of this body, Staff, of course, was taking notes and compiling some of the issues that were identified throughout the process, in addition to what Member Aragon had included in part of his explanation of the vote on the motion. So we can compile that information and include it in the recommendation to the board and in notification to the applicant. But if potentially there's other things that committee members feel like they really want to hit home again, or if there's something that they didn't mention during the process that you want to talk about now, then we can identify those here and now, and I'll make sure to include those in the information to the board and the applicant. Otherwise, we'll just include the discussion from the public body today, not obviously in its entirety, but.
I might just, I would like to share some feedback that just, it felt like the application was, here's a program that we implement in California, and this is how it can help Arizona, versus coming at the application, framing it, here are the needs in the state, before writing it, looking what are the needs in the state of Arizona and how can this program support those needs within the state of Arizona. So kind of just reframing and retooling the application. Clearly there's strength in a lot of the programs that you do offer, but just in terms of tailoring it to an Arizona specific audience, I think would be incredibly beneficial.
The coursework was strong. Mm-hmm. It was very strong, and we just need to get it put in the context for us here in Arizona, and I think this could be a program that could be a great benefit to our students and our schools. Any other comments?
I think my only comment, and I spoke briefly to it, is that I did get my good credential in California, so a lot of these things I understood, but I learned very quickly moving from California to Arizona. There's a whole different language, and so sometimes I think it's harder to connect the two if you don't have that experience, and I think that's true for probably the institutions that you would be working with, the districts you'll be working with, the people that were going to be leaders, as well as the mentors, that kind of thing. So I think that they actually will help leverage you in to making sure the two connect. And with such small districts, small. I mean, my school district has 8 schools, so and that's not uncommon in Phoenix. So I think there's just a need to look at that a little bit closer.
You have established connections already here in Arizona that sounds like you did not have at the time of the application. So you've got, with having the connections in the education community, that should make this process of revision, if that needs to be done, go easier for you.
I think submitting 3 different applications would be helpful. That way you can really differentiate between the 3 different programs without us having to think through and trying to make assumptions where we probably didn't need to make them. It would make it really clear for us as we review it. It would just be helpful.
And Madam Chair, to that point, we're going to work on trying to make it a little more clear on the instructions on the application too, so that's a little more clear, and especially for the SPED programs, trying to clarify some of the things in there, so that way the applicants are clear about what's expected also.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. The last item on the agenda then is future meeting dates and items for future agendas. Something that we had come up at one of the earlier meetings of this committee was our being able to submit our scores back to the staff prior to the meeting. And we had, in talking about that, we're kind of thinking maybe 24 hours before the meeting, if we could electronically submit our feedback, that would give the staff an opportunity to look over the information and shoot out any questions that may have come up to the program submitting the application.
Yeah, Madam Chair and members, that would be helpful, and also staff, recognizes that sometimes the questions come up and things change after you hear from the applicant. So I think maybe we'll have a conversation, Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair, about what would work best to try to move forward on how we do the evaluations. Maybe this is more of a 2-meeting kind of deal where we have one meeting where it's just a discussion with the applicant, and then the committee members sort of take that information in and make their evaluations and their scoring, and then we come back for what would potentially, hopefully, be a short meeting, the following day or something with the recommendation and the scoring. That's something else that maybe we'll think about some more. I mean, it's a newer committee. It's only been around a year or so, so we're still feeling out how to best make it work. And it's also, because it's a public body, it's a little bit different than how some of the reviews have happened previously. So maybe we'll feel that out a little bit more. And we don't have any applications on the docket right now, so there's nothing pressing. So maybe that's something that if committee members have ideas or if we want to work it out, we can talk about it more.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I make one last comment?
Pardon me?
Can I make one last comment?
Yes, absolutely. More comments.
I just wanted to make sure I said this before I left today. In terms of the application being together instead of in 3 separate or 4 separate, since it's technically 4 separate certificates, I think that you all are pursuing. I don't think that was the biggest deal for me, and I just want to make sure I make that clear. That was a small part. I think that would make it easier, but I can also see a world where someone would submit all of that together in a very clear way, and it would just be one thing, and that would be fine. I think I do want to just make sure that I'm being clear that that's not my biggest concern. My biggest concern is just a lack of evidence to the standards that were there. So I wanted to just make that clear so that I'm not sending you all away feeling like, oh, all they really want is just those things separated. I think the evidence piece was the biggest issue for me.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the committee? Catch or anything from staff? Are we ready? Then we will adjourn this meeting of the committee at 4:28. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Alliant International University for coming and spending this afternoon with us.
Thank you.